is Andrew Holmes, and you are watching Burr Cash Flow Investors. So remember, we have the 3-day conference that is coming up, and that is coming up on July 21, 22, 23. And guess what? As we start getting closer, obviously now suddenly people are all waking up and they're like, oh my God, I want to buy the VIP tickets. So the VIP tickets are still on sale as we get closer. Obviously, those will go away because those are the first to sell. It's $150 more to go as a VIP. The best part is you get to sit, talk, network with all the panelists, all the guests, and that is something 100% you should be doing. And super thrilled because guess what the focus is going to be this time is last time we were coming off of the wholesale focus. This time it's going to be how do you scale up by adding Airbnbs to your cash flow portfolio, and how do you do it locally, and how do you absolutely explode your cash flow. So make sure you're in it. So we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about nuances of how do you do that and how do you continue scaling up. So if you haven't registered, make sure you go to andrewholmesevents.com, register for the upcoming 3-day. It's July 3rd, 21, 22, and 23. Having said that, let's jump into it. So today we're going to, it's supposed to be Friday, so hopefully you have some fun plans with your friends. And generally on Friday, we try to do a fun story, a kind of a life lesson type of story. And as I was kind of trying to think about it, I'm like, well, what should we talk about? And it was interesting because just in the car, I was with Matthew, and we're going to a bunch of properties, following up on a bunch of things. And I was listening to a old Earl Nightingale recording. And if you've never listened to Earl Nightingale, it's just absolute delight. Old school motivational speaker, but there's so many things. And I've been listening to him since I was about 17 years old, right? And I think compared to most people, probably him and Mike Ferry had the most impact in terms of on my life because some of the things that he's talking about, there's just so much wisdom in that. So I absolutely love Earl Nightingale. And kind of from his point, I thought we would talk about. Is everything okay, Joe? Okay. So I thought we would talk about kind of life experience. So some of you guys know I moved to Chicago in 2002, right? I've talked about kind of my story from Atlanta about the gas station that blew up. We're not going to get into that today. But, sometimes that when you are at kind of the lowest point in your life, some interesting things happen. So I'll never forget this. And I wanted to talk about the story because this is something that kind of 2 or 3 different times in my life this has come back. And that is that you become what you think about all day long, right? That some people become something extraordinary because they feel that, hey, I was always going to do that. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I was always going to do that. I knew that I had to be it a TV producer, be it an athlete, be it whatever. They see the vision of it, or they see this kind of a thing that they have in their early on, and somehow they find a way over time. And I really, really believe in that. So I want to relate this kind of experience, the story, because there's a couple of different kind of lessons out of it. And maybe, just maybe, as I explain this, maybe you have had these moments where you have self-doubt, where you feel you're not good enough, where you feel, oh my God, is this really going to work? All those types of things. So I'm 2002, and I think this was maybe April, May is when I moved here to Chicago. And what I will never forget is that it was a time when I literally had about, I think, $450 when I moved here, right? That's all I had left after paying for gas. And so with $450, imagine this, right? You move somewhere where you don't know anybody. I had a friend downtown. She used to live there, and Christine, and I slept on her couch a couple days, and I was pretending that, oh, I'm looking for housing, blah, blah, blah. Well, but if you're looking for housing, then why not go stay at a hotel? Right? I mean, clearly, I didn't have money, and that was the thing. And it's interesting when and maybe I was 23 years old, 22 years old, and you feel kind of desperate, and you don't know what to do because you don't want other people to look down on you, right? And I was in that situation, and she used to live right off of Ohio, and then I told her that I'm like, oh, I found something, because how much do you mooch off of somebody more than a day or two? Right? Because again, I mean, and so I had this plan. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go get, because when you drop out of college, right? At the time, you didn't have Uber, so it's not like I could drive Uber. Maybe I could have done that. I'm like, the only thing I knew was, I was like, okay, I'm gonna get back into real estate. So I had to pay some fees, this, that. I went, talked to Remax Central, Miss Kathy at Remax, and I was getting my license done and all that kind of stuff. But I needed income, right? Because I couldn't afford to stay. I mean, literally, I joined a gym membership at the time in Schaumburg, and I slept in my car because that's all I had. And I got a storage facility, and I put my clothes over there because, a small little thing. And so basically that way I had a place to sleep. I had a place to go put clothes, whatever belongings that I had, and then I could go take a shower, right? And I'd pretend as if I was going to the gym, so I'd go work out because you don't want to go kind of just go to the shower, right? I mean, and so I don't know, maybe you can relate. Maybe you've had times where it was not so good. You're probably not in the best place, and nobody chooses to be there. But again, that was what it was, right? And I remember going and getting a job as a server at the at the time it was the Wyndham, right, which is right off of Elgin O'Hare Expressway. People who know that area, coming from Roselle, going towards kind of the industrial area for Elk Grove Village to the airport, right? That road right there. It used to be a Wyndham, and there was a Shula Steakhouse there. And a couple of things happened over there that was rather interesting, right? I'm selling real estate, and so my biggest fear used to be is that somebody who I had a listing for, because all day long I used to do cold calls from Remax, which was down the street. And it was very interesting because all the agents would kind of walk by my office, and they would see me standing up on a desk kind of like this. I had a regular desk, and I'd put 2 cinder blocks underneath. So it was raised because you have more energy when you do calls, right? Cold calls. And I had 2 headsets, and I was doing cold calls. This is basically what it was. And so, and everybody would kind of look at me. They just thought I was strange, right? That why would you do cold calling? Well, I mean, think about this, right? We're in a sales profession if you're doing real estate sales. And yet, how are you taught to get business? Well, you, at the time, you either put a lot of money in doing mailers, you put the ads in, on basically on Zillow, blah, blah, you buy a bunch of ads. But then if you don't have money, then how are you supposed to get in? I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that cold calling was something that I could do. So I used to call FSBOs every day, expired listings, canceled listings every single day, right? And everybody in the office used to think that I was just nuts. And it was interesting because, actually, at the time I was not with Remax. I take that back. I was at Coal Banker in Schaumburg at the time. And everybody, like, literally thought I was nuts, right? They would look at me with strange looks because they would go on a listing appointment, and I would go and I would take the listing because I was just aggressive, right? Their listing would expire, I would call it, and then I would get the listing. And I mean, a lot of people in the office found me strange, and I am a little strange. There's no question about it, because I don't think like the average person. I don't want to be average, right? Because if some people, and if you're going to be a higher performer, if you're going to do well, you cannot think like everybody else does, right? Because if you thought like everybody else, then you're going to be everybody else, right? This is just my belief. And so everybody thought I was, because I wouldn't talk to too many people in the office. It's not that I thought I was any better. It's just that I wanted to mind my own business. I was not in a good place financially and mentally because I was just desperate, right? So I tried to go in, do my job, run to the other place at the at the place where I used to be a server, and a few people in the office found out about it, and I remember they used to laugh at me, right? Because it's like, oh, he works at that place, blah blah. I mean, I had no other option, right? I was desperate, and so it was kind of an interesting period in my life. And I remember taking a few listings, and they happened to be around the Elk Grove Village area, and that's where this particular steakhouse was. And it was supposed to be a nice steakhouse. So every time I remember, I used to pray, like before the shift starts, that, oh my God, I hope, God, nobody that I have their listing or that a buyer that I'm trying to sell a house to show up today for dinner, right? Because it's not that I was doing anything wrong. It's just that I felt, um, I felt kind of down on myself, and maybe nobody was judging me. But unfortunately, because of my poor self-esteem, I was judging me, right? And I thought I should be in a better place. And I'll never forget this. There was this one guy, Jose and Maria. They were a couple, husband and wife, used to work there. And then there was another guy, it was an Indian guy, that used to work at the bar. So he was the bartender in the middle of the hotel lobby. That lobby is actually still there, and that guy still works there. And I still remember that a bunch of the people that used to work there every night after we would end the shift. And at that time, I still remember, if I made like $60, $70 with tips, I thought it was pretty good. If I made $100, that was like, hey man, this is really good, right? Because then I could basically pay pay rent and put some money aside, that kind of thing. And I'll never forget this, that I signed a sublease in that Versailles or whatever that thing is in Schaumburg, and I had no furniture. And at the time, I had a roommate. Gaju was my roommate, and I didn't know this dude was from India, and somebody was doing a sublease, right? And I bought a sleeping bag, and we used to sleep on the floor because he had a room here, I had a room there. Neither of us could afford any furniture, and then we used to go to Costco to save money. And one time he would buy, one time I would buy. And it's interesting because sometimes, you go through a phase in your life where now I can look back and laugh about it. At the time, it was desperate. And it was interesting because we both used to think, man, one day, he used to tell me, because he used to drink a lot. And this was interesting because at night, at evening, 6, 7 o'clock, we would get home. I like to cook. So I would cook. His deal was to do dishes, right? And because we had no furniture in the main living room, right, there was no place to sit down. So all you could do is there was a little bar thing, so you could put the food there, and you had to eat standing. And we couldn't invite anybody because when you have no furniture, you're poor. Then, I mean, that was kind of the situation. But we were like, man, we're gonna get out of this one day, right? And I'll never forget this. I used to listen to motivational tapes, Earl Nightingale, Tony Robbins, all this stuff. And so he's coming home, and I didn't know this, that he likes to drink, right? So he would basically, put a whiskey and he would start drinking, and I would come home, and I'd listen to all this stuff. Like this is like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night after my shift at the place where I was working as a server. And he's trying to drink, and I'm listening to this motivational stuff. Now I'm motivated, 12 o'clock at night, and I'm pacing the floor because I have all these ideas in my head. And after a little bit, right, and he saw that I had a hamper full of like clothes, whatever. I had a few shirts, white shirts, and a hamper full of like the old tapes, right? And every day I would, all these motivational tapes, Les Brown and all this kind of stuff. And after a few days, right, we go to Costco, and I notice he's not buying any more liquor. And so he goes, so I'm like, hey man, what happened? I thought you like to drink. I mean, like, I've never been much of a drinker. I mean, one glass of wine, I'm done, right? That's just how I've always been. So he had no company. He's like, man, to understand music, you need a brain and you need a heart. And Andrew, you have neither, because you really don't care. At 12 o'clock at night, you're listening to all these motivational tapes, right? And I'm like, well, clearly, maybe, I don't know, maybe I don't have a brain and I don't have a heart, because I'm like, I really don't understand because till the time I would get there, he would listen to all these old, depressing Indian songs. He was an Indian guy, right? Hindi songs, right? And he'd be lost in his thoughts about how he lost his girlfriend. It's like a lot of the old Indian songs are like a country music, cassette, country music played backwards. You lose your girlfriend, you lose your house, you lose your, fence yard, and you lose your truck, right? It's that kind of thing. And I'm going like, man, I don't understand this. I'm not interested in this nonsense. I want to get all motivated. And so at 12 o'clock, I'd get all motivated. Now I couldn't go to sleep. So I'm like, well, what happened to your liquor? So he goes like, man, the problem with you is you don't drink. The other problem is you're listening to all this motivational shit all the time. He's like, now I'm all motivated. Now I don't want to drink, right? I had no idea that I was such bad company when it came to drinking, that this guy came up drinking, right? And he's a dear friend of mine. Like he's like my brother, because when you go through tough times, you develop bonds with people, right, that last for years and years. And I remember at this place where I used to work as a server, that every time I would make a little bit of money, I had it planned. I'm like, okay, I got to pay some MLS dues. I got to make rent. I got to do this. I got to do this, because in the morning I had to go back to the office and I had to start making phone calls, because I was trying to get a bunch of listings so that if I had enough inventory and a few sales, I would put some money aside. Then I wouldn't have to, I could quit my job over here. And my plan was to get back into real estate, hopefully eventually investing. And I'll never forget this, because at night, all these guys, and I had a Jaguar, right? So this is the Jaguar I had, that I had brought from Atlanta. And I used to park it, because it was a nice car. I used to park it way the hell away from everybody, right? Because anybody's going to ask me, I couldn't afford another car because this was at least paid off, right? So I had one of those 4-door Van Den Pluses, right, when I had money. And so now I can't afford to sell the sucker, and I can't afford to buy a different car because I have a decent car. And in real estate, I thought I needed a decent car. So then I'm like, but I would park it way away, because I didn't want the people who used to work with me at the hotel to be laughing at me. So I'd wait till they were gone or they were busy, and then I would sneak out, right? And I still remember one time, like a bunch of times at night, they were like, hey man, we're going out to the after hours bars. We're going to go drinking, right? And this is interesting about people, that the less money they have, the more money they waste in BS, right? In complete bullshit, which makes no sense to me, right? They considered it a form of entertainment. I considered it stupidity. It's just me. And in life, you become what you think about, because I remember they'd talk about being broke all the time, and then they would go buy a car, right? It was a used car, but then they would buy a way nicer car than they could afford. Now they're talking about that they're broke, but then instead of buying something practical, which is what I would think you would want to do, they would buy something that was out of their budget, right? Completely out of their budget. And that made no sense to me. And they would always, their mindset was, man, I can't believe, I've been, I haven't had a day off. I've been working like 8 days in a row, and I haven't had a day off. And so all the shifts that they wanted to drop, I would pick up, right? And I would pick up because I'm desperate, right? I mean, I don't have any money. So, and they would used to find strange. They're like, but you don't take a day off. I'm like, man, I mean, I can really, use the work, right? I mean, I didn't, today I would have no problem saying, hey man, I'm broke. I need to make money. At the time, I would just pick up any shifts, right? Like I remember one time working 78 days, every day I would go there because I'm like, hey, every day I go, I make $60, $80, $100, sometimes where staff is short, so I make more money. And to me, it was just mind-blowing that you could be broke and then not work. I mean, this is just my brain, right? And for most people who are broke and they don't want to work, I mean, you're a dumbass, right? I mean, and I mean this sincerely. And if I offend you, I don't really care. Because, and the reason I say this is, guys, at some point in your life, at some point, you're going to have to pay a price, right? And if you don't pay a price, guess what? That where you are is not going to change, right? I don't really have a problem saying to people that, hey, listen, if you're broke, then guess what? You got to go get 2 jobs, go get 2 jobs, right? You can't go out and do fun things, then don't, right? Because at some point, you're going to have to pay a price. Either you're going to pay it at an earlier time in your life, or you're going to pay it later, or you're going to pay it for the rest of your life. There is no such thing, right? Unless your parents have a lot of money and they give it to you or whatever, right? That may be different. And my parents did very well for themselves, but I was not going to go to them. I left home saying, hey, I'm going to be a multimillionaire. And I was not, come hell or high water, I would jump off a bridge before I was going to go to them and say I lost, right? That was not going to happen. I mean, that's just not the type of home environment I grew up in, right? And losing was not an option. And what was interesting, and here's the reason why I wanted to show you guys this story, because today, right, whenever I feel depressed, I've been trying to tell Lori this a bunch of times, we should do one of the big 3 days at that hotel, right? And we can all go and buy all the food that we want at the particular, because that bar today it's a Westin, and that bar's been kind of redone. The steakhouse is a different steakhouse today. I guess Shula Steakhouse is gone. And what was interesting was this: these same people that used to work there, right? Some of the people are still at the same place. It's not that some of them were smart people, right? It's not that they were not I was any smarter than them, or that, I had different breaks. It's just that the difference was this, that when every night when they were done with work, they would choose to take the money that they earned, and they would choose to go drinking with that money. Whatever was left over, they would pay their bills during the day. For me, I just chose to take that money, and in the morning, I would go to Coldwell Banker in Schaumburg, and basically, even though I didn't want to make the cold calls, it was not comfortable, right? It sucked. Going out on appointments and people laughing at you because you're that desperate, it does not feel good. But guess what? I had to do what I had to do, right? And we've all faced those moments in our times where you have to do what you have to do, right? Because you have to basically take a step at a time, a step at a time, a step at a time. And I'll never forget this, because I still remember at Coldwell Banker, like I had a problem at the time, and maybe today even I have that problem, and that is sometimes I have a big mouth and a small brain, meaning I will speak before I think. And at the time, I used to have a manager over there, Larry Rowan, that's this guy's name, right? And a bunch of times he gave me a warning. I just was dumb enough not to heed his warning. And he's like, Andrew, man, you're a really hard worker. I really appreciate you. You work your butt off. But, sometimes you say things and we don't appreciate. That's not how he said it, but he did say that. And at one time I wanted to go send him a book called, Losers Are Forever, right? And then I wanted to go park the Rolls Royce in front of that stupid office. And that was actually my stupidity. It wasn't Larry's. I'll admit that today. That I called him an idiot and a dumbass in front of a bunch of people. And when you are working in an office, doesn't matter what your thoughts are, I should have kept my thoughts to myself, because I'm calling him an idiot, and probably I was the bigger idiot because I was the one more desperate, right? And anyways, so they fired my ass, but it was interesting because I had 27 listings at the time. So if you're in real estate, you know how much money that is, right? That because I would not shut up, right? I had too many belief systems because I felt that they were setting up their agents for failure, right? And that was my mistake, that I ran my mouth and I didn't shut up. I should have just shut up and mind my own business. And, but what was interesting was this: 6 months after I started, none of the agents were laughing at me. Now they resented me. And they resented me is because I would go on the same listing appointment they did, and I would take the listing. Why? Because I was that desperate to get out of the situation that I was in. And so I was that aggressive, right? I would keep calling the sellers. Now, interesting thing is this: of all the people that I worked with, there was this couple, Jose and Maria, that I was trying to sell them. My goal was in 90 days, I was going to work there and I'm going to have enough listings, maybe a sale or two, so I can quit this serving tables, right? Serving tables at the steakhouse, right? And I still remember they're buying a property, Elk Grove Village, FHA property, maybe 105,000 or something, right? Little 2-bedroom, 1-bath. And I thought it was a great deal for them that they were buying. And I was going to make maybe $2,500, $2,700. I don't remember what it was, right? A little bit in commission. And that money was going to be the extra money I was going to have to be able to quit this job. And basically, hopefully get more listings, because most people in real estate, if you're going to go visit their properties, whatever, it's maybe after 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. And I had to show up at work over there at 4:30, 5 o'clock for dinner, right? And so I was like, well, I'm going to be able to get more listings, maybe do some more sales, then I can have, then I don't have to worry about this anymore. And I still remember it was going to be a Friday. And Friday, like morning, 7 a.m., and they had a closing, 12 o'clock closing, right? And I've been looking forward to this day. I remember them calling, and they hadn't called me on Wednesday, Thursday, and I had been desperately trying to get hold of them. And they called with the thing saying that, hey, we kind of changed our mind. We get cold feet, and we don't want to buy the property. And I still remember not, I'm dying here, right? Because I'm like, oh my God, I had all these plans, blah, blah, but what do you say? You can't say anything. So I said, okay, man, no problem. It is what it is. And then I got to let the other agent know. She's getting mad at me, but it was what it was. There's nothing I could do about it. And I remember having to work at that steakhouse another 30 days, right? Because I was counting on this money. And then I remember for all the days that I worked there, like 120 days, I'll never forget this. I worked every single night. Didn't matter if it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, made no difference, right? And I worked because what else? Like I'm 22, 23 years old, whatever I was at the time. It's not like I had any other option. I needed the money and the choice was simple, right? That taking a day off never even occurred to me, right? It never even came into my mind because I'm trying to get to a better place in life. And at the end of the day, right, I did not feel that I had the luxury of taking a day off. And so it never even came to my mind that I need a vacation day, right? So that was just what it was. And I remember quitting over there and they're like, oh, you're going to be back, blah, blah, blah. And they knew I was in real estate. I was selling houses, blah, blah, blah. And they used to call me Mr. Real Estate. They're like, oh, yeah, man, Andrew, you're Mr. Real Estate, you're going to be rich. They all thought it was real funny, right? Because they're like, oh, man, this is all bullshit, right? This doesn't work. You're going to be back, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, man, I had no rhetorical, I couldn't come back with anything. And the reason was because I was like, well, maybe they're right. Maybe, maybe this is not going to work. I can't burn a bridge with people who work here, with the manager and everybody, because maybe I'll need it again. Maybe what if the houses don't sell, right? All the doubts that we all have. And it's interesting because I remember quitting that job and a few different incidents happened, which I want to relate, that we become what we think about. And the difference is this. So number one was I call on a listing in Lake in the Hills, cold call, expired listing. And I'm like, I've heard this voice before. The man who picks up the phone, I've heard this voice before somewhere. And I didn't even, and this was maybe a year and a half, 2 years after I'd quit over there. And I remember calling, and he was the guy who used to be the manager of the steakhouse at the time, right? And at the time, as a manager, he was making maybe 80, 90,000 bucks, right? And when you're making nothing, he was like, everybody's like, yeah, man, he makes a lot of money, right? This was kind of the thing. And I remember calling him and we started talking. He's like, what's your name again? I'm like, Andrew Holmes, blah, blah, blah. He's like, man, didn't you work at Shula's Steakhouse? And I'm like, yeah. I was like, oh, who is this that knows this, right? Because I felt bad about that whole experience. And I'm like, oh my God, this is Jim, right? And he was going through a divorce. So he was selling his property in Lake in the Hills. And I call him, blah, blah. He's like, man, Andrew, it worked out, blah, blah. I've seen your signs. You do a lot of business in the subdivision. I'm like, yeah, man. I mean, I don't know what else to do, right? So I'm trying to sell a lot of real estate. Hopefully one day I can be somewhere. I have this goal in my head. And I remember selling his house, right? And he's like, you always used to talk about real estate. Are you ever going to invest? I'm like, yeah, this is, mind you, somewhere around 2003 or 4, right? When this conversation happened. I'm like, yeah, man, I'm waiting for the right market. Every year the market's going up. So, but I'm going to invest, Jim. I'm going to invest, man. I don't know how, but I'm going to invest. Then in like sometime after, I remember one time in the evening going there to the steakhouse, and not to the outside. They used to serve this kind of a steak sandwich. And every time I would feel depressed, every time I'd feel down, I would go and sit at that bar in the outside hotel lobby, and I would have a sandwich, right? 10, 15 bucks, whatever it is, 20 bucks to have a sandwich. And then I'd go home. All the people, a bunch of them, were still there at the hotel. For whatever reason, I don't know, maybe I've gotten a lot older or whatever it is, but none of them recognize me. I recognize every single one of them, right? And I'd always leave a nice tip. They would always be having the same conversation. They'd ask me, hey, what do you do? I'm like, well, I do real estate, blah, 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 blah. And over the years, it's very interesting that I went from that Jaguar to a older Land Rover, to a Mercedes E-Class, to a Mercedes ML, to a Rolls Royce, to a Bentley, and to a Ferrari. And every single time after I got to the Bentley, after I got to the Ferrari, and after I got to the Rolls Royce, every time I've pulled in, parked the goddamn thing right in front of the hotel, right? Whenever I go there, I'll always go there alone. And they will never move those cars because they're like, oh, it must be somebody important. Guys, it's a nobody important. It's just little old me. But they'll never move those cars. And guess what? They give everybody a wide berth because nobody wants to kind of ding those cars and have a problem. And what's interesting is this, that today they ask me the same exact question. What do you do? And every single time I've had this conversation with them from 2004 till today, we're 2023. It's like, yeah, man, only 3 responses. Yeah, I didn't know that you can really make money in real estate. Is that for real? Or, I was going to get my license and then I decided not to because, I'm doing pretty okay. Or, oh my God, I thought about investing. And these are the response, and these are people that I know. And then a funny incident happened in 2021. I'll never forget this. When I had the smaller airplane, at the airport, I call in the morning at Chicago Executive, and I'm like, hey guys, can you pull out the 22 Tango Papa was the tail number of that airplane. And I'm like, don't put fuel. I'll pick up fuel where I'm going. And I was flying down somewhere, Indiana or somewhere, I don't remember. And fuel is much cheaper over there. So I'm like, I'll just pick up fuel over there. They pull it out. I get in the airplane. I check the fuel gauge. They topped off the tanks, right? That airplane used to take maybe 125 gallons or something like that. So maybe whatever it was, they topped off 60 gallons or whatever, right? Like the airplane now takes 400 gallons, right? So it'd be a lot more cost. But so, I'm peeved off, right? For no reason. I called the office over there and I'm like, I told them not to put fuel in there, blah, 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 blah. I'm just being bitchy in the morning for no reason. Again, anyways, if it wasn't a big deal, I go where I was going, I come back, I'm leaving, they're pulling the airplane back into the hangar, and this guy comes running to the car. And he's like, sir, I'm so sorry, blah, 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 about the morning incident. We really apologize. And I'm like, now I'm feeling bad. I'm like, dude, it's no big deal. Like, it's an older gentleman. I'm like, it's not a big deal, man. I was just being bitchy. It's just, don't worry about it. You guys do a great job. I don't care. And he's like, no, you don't understand. I just got the promotion and blah, blah, blah. It's a great job. And I'm like, man, it's not a big deal, man. It's no big deal. I'll call them. I'll tell them it's not a big deal. And he's like, Andrew, you don't recognize me, do you? I'm like, now you're like, I'm trying to remember who this guy is, right? I'm like, And he's like, remember Shula's Steakhouse? I'm like, yeah. And that's when I realized this guy was Jose. He's like, man, I've worked here for the last year and a half, and you always say hi and you walk past. First, I thought you were just being rude and you made it so you didn't want to talk to me. But then I realized that you didn't even recognize me. And he's like, a lot of times, like when we used to have the big signs on the highway, he's like, over the years, when you started the real estate seminars, when you did the AM 560 radio station, and the seminars and all this stuff, he's like, I get your advertising, I get all this stuff. He's like, man, for all those years, we've been thinking about buying a house. And we still rent where we used to in Addison. And he's like, every time I see your ad, I turn it off or I change the channel or I will click, because he's like, it bothers me every time that we had this conversation in 2002. And now here I'm like, dude, I worked with this guy, right? And I couldn't have afforded a tire on an airplane. And here is this guy putting fuel in it. And I'm like, dude, so I get out of the car, I give a big hug. I'm like, man, it's no big deal, right? This is no big deal. I'm like, I promise you, you're not going to lose your job over it. I promise you, right? We've been old friends. But it's interesting is this, that, we become what we think about. What these guys were always thinking was that without doing work, how do we get ahead? They were happy, they were content, and they did not want to make a change. It's like, the old thing where there's a dog that's laying, and a person walks by and he asks the owner, hey, why is the dog moaning and groaning? And the owner goes, well, he's kind of laying on a nail. But I said, well, if he's laying on a nail, why doesn't the dog move? And the owner goes, well, because it doesn't hurt bad enough. And I think a lot of us, wherever we're stalled out, it's not like it just applies to you or whoever else. It's for all of us in a lot of our parts of our lives. We don't move because it doesn't hurt bad enough. And for a lot of these guys that used to work with me, they are exactly where they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. We're all getting older. For men, maybe balder, right? Yet people don't move because they see themselves where they are, even in the near future. You become what you think about. And a lot of this has to do with how you're thinking. See, I was not comfortable where I was at. I saw myself at a much, much, much different place. And the only difference is that from 2002, 2003 till today, it's been 20 years. Yet, I think I'm at a much, 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 much better place than where I started out. And I just wanted to relate that story because a lot of us have seen people that maybe have gone way the heck ahead. And it's not because somehow most of the times they got lucky, right? If somebody is just born in a very wealthy family, there's nothing you and I can do about it. And they have it better than us. But for most of us that are fortunate enough to live in America, right, we have an incredible opportunity. The question becomes is, you become what you think about. So the question is, what are you thinking? Are you thinking this is just good enough? Are you thinking that this is as good as it gets? Or are you working towards a better future for you and your family? And this doesn't have to be just in terms of finances. Finance is one part of it. Maybe it's spiritual for you. Maybe it's health. Maybe it's something totally different. But this is something that I've thought about many, many, many times. And so many times different incidents have happened where I'll meet people that were at a certain place. Some people have gone a long ways, and yet others have stayed in place because that's the best they thought they could accomplish. Hopefully you draw some lessons out of it. Again, remember, the 3-day event is coming up on July 21, 22, and 23. So make sure you register. It's andrewholmesevents.com. Invite your friends, invite your family, and anybody that you are friends with or your other fellow investors. Make sure you tell them about the lives that we do. We always try to add value into your life. Having said that, thanks a bunch and have a good day.